The coach, full of pride, then made a critical mistake.
Care to join us for a demonstration, Granddad?
He challenged a man who didn't need to prove his strength.
A martial arts coach bullied a 9-year-old boy. He didn't know the boy's quiet grandfather was Chuck Norris. In a quiet California dojo, single mom Riley Dawson was poised to stand up for more than her son's pride. What was to be a positive martial arts test unraveled when Coach Damen Cortez, a pompous trainer, assaulted her son with public humiliation. Chuck Norris wasn't your average onlooker. For more than 50 years, he was a worldwide martial arts legend, a retired U.S. Air Force air policeman, and a 6-time world karate champion who defeated opponents with gentle efficiency and unparalleled discipline. When Damien attempted to assert authority by bullying a sensitive boy and teasing a quiet senior in the back row, he did not realize that he was provoking the tranquility before a storm. Chuck's reaction, a disciplined surgical dismantling, would reveal not just the coach's style but his heart, and it would ignite something greater than an individual brawl. What had started out as a kid's initial karate lesson would become a dojo-wide reckoning. Valley Edge would never forget the day its self-proclaimed dragon was brought low by an actual master, and a legend taught everyone what martial arts were all about. Before we get started again, let us know where you're listening from. And if this episode moves you, be sure to subscribe because tomorrow I've got something special in store for you. The sunbeams streamed through the tall windows of Valley Edge Martial Arts, illuminating splashy rectangles on the shiny hardwood floor. The dojo vibrated with pre-class anticipation. Parents milling in groups along the spectator area, kids in starched white G's skipping and play-fighting in the corners. The air was thick with the familiar smell of athletic tape, floor polish, and anxious expectation. Riley Dawson at the reception counter, one hand resting lightly on her son's shoulder. Her dark hair gathered into a neat ponytail. Her face a tense blend of encouragement and concern. Next to her, 9-year-old Ethan glared at the ground, his shoulders slumped forward as though attempting to shrink into himself. "First time?" Mara asked over the counter, her voice a contradiction to her no-nonsense demeanor. Her red-framed glasses were looped on a chain around her neck, and she sported a Valley Edge polo that had better days ahead of it. "Sure," Riley smiled, squeezing Ethan's shoulder. "We're thinking maybe martial arts will be beneficial to confidence." Marla's expression softened. She spoke quietly, leaning forward. "Smart move." Only she hesitated, looking toward the training floor where several instructors were arranging equipment. "Coach Damen runs a tight ship. Don't let his intensity intimidate you." Riley glanced over at Mara's gaze to a muscular man with a black belt, barking orders at 2 younger instructors. His GI was emblazed with patches, and his presence seemed to take up the room, not merely physically, but with an energy that commanded attention. "That's Coach Damen?" Riley asked softly. Marlon nodded. "The dragon himself," she said, her own voice carefully neutral. "Former regional champion runs this place like it's manufacturing Olympic athletes, not grade schoolers." Ethan looked up, his eyes opening slightly wider. Riley gave his shoulder another squeeze. "It'll be okay, buddy. Remember what we discussed? This is just a try. If it's not for you, no pressure." Ethan nodded silently, but his eyes were fixed on Coach Damien, who was now demonstrating a kick with over-the-top precision. Nearby students watched with expressions ranging from admiration to thinly veiled terror. As Mara handed over papers to fill out, Riley became aware of a man who had slipped into the dojo behind them. Something about his quiet, considered movements caught her attention. The way he nodded politely to another parent. How he chose a seat in the back corner of the viewing area with a clear view line to the entire floor. He was older, perhaps in his early 70s, but stood with remarkable posture. He wore jeans and a simple button-down shirt, and while nothing about him drew attention, there was something in his composed stillness that made him impossible to ignore once seen. "Is that one of the grandparents?" Riley asked innocently. Mara looked up, then did a double-take. Something crossed her face. Surprise, maybe recognition, but she covered it fast. "Don't think so. Must have just been looking over the dojo." She pushed the paperwork across the counter. "Fill these out while I get Ethan a loaner GI." While Riley filled out the forms, the atmosphere in the dojo changed. Coach Dahman clapped his hands with military efficiency, and the ragtag students came to attention, standing in neat lines on the mat with practiced efficiency. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice rang out without effort. "Another Saturday, another chance to thin out the weaklings from the warriors." Riley's pen hung suspended mid-signature. She glanced up, seeing children as young as 6 stand stiffly, at attention. A blond boy toward the front was pacing back and forth on his feet. Coach Dahman moved in on him, circling like a predator. "Reynolds, you nervous or just need to go to the bathroom?" The coach's voice thundered. The boy stiffened. "No, sir. No, sir. What? No, sir." "I'm not nervous," the boy stammered. "Could have fooled me." Coach Dahman scanned the room, playing to the crowd of parents. Some snickered uncomfortably. "Fear is the enemy. People. I don't instruct fear in my dojo." Riley felt Ethan move closer to her side. She looked down at her son, whose eyes were now intently fixed on his shoes. "You okay?" she whispered. Ethan's mouth formed a nod, but the slight shiver in his lower lip indicated otherwise. "We can go away if no," Ethan broke in, voice hardly audible. "I want to attempt." In the corner of the room, the older man in the back shifted slightly, salt and pepper brows over watchful eyes following Coach Dahman's every move. His face was expressionless, but his interest was evinced by an attentiveness to his watching that implied he was taking it all in. Mara came back with a GI folded, up in her arms the size of a child. "Changing rooms are down that way," she indicated a hallway with a nod. "Get on with it, though." Damien hates latecomers even more than he hates. She caught herself smiling tightly. Well, he's punctual. Riley guided Ethan toward the changing room, acutely aware of the other children already assembled. As they passed the older man in the corner, he gave them a small, almost imperceptible nod. There was something comforting in that small action, a quiet acceptance that was in sharp relief to the tense air in the dojo. 10 minutes on, Ethan stood at the side of the mat in his borrowed GI belt tied inefficiently about his waist. The white material engulfed his compact frame, making him seem even more fragile. Riley smiled encouragingly from the sideline, attempting to exude confidence she didn't quite have. "New kid," Coach Dahman declared, gesturing towards Ethan at the front of the room. Ethan moved forward, his steps reluctant. "Name?" demanded the coach. "Ethan Dawson, sir," he said, voice barely audible across the mat. "Speak up, Dawson." "A Warrior Projects." "Ethan Dawson, sir," Ethan parroted, voice cracking with exertion. Coach Dahman walked around him, inspecting his position with overblown scrutiny. "Shoulders back. Chin up. You're not here to view bugs on my floor." Ethan stiffened, blinking furiously. Riley's fists bunched in her lap. "Better," Damien granted. "Barely," joined the white belt rank. As Ethan moved to the back row, Damon spoke to the class. "Today we keep potential ones separate from time wasters." He showed a front kick with tremendous power, his foot inches from a young assistant instructor's face. The young man, Sensei Mark, as denoted by his uniform, didn't blink, but a rivulet of sweat ran down his temple. "Do it again!" Damien yelled, and the class started doing the kick in unison. Riley observed as Ethan strained to replicate the movement, his coordination letting him down. Every time he lost his balance, his face grew redder with humiliation. When Coach Damon reached his row, Ethan's whole body stiffened. The coach halted right before him. "That is not a kick, Dawson. That is a limp noodle convulsing." Some nervous giggles escaped from the other pupils. Once more, Ethan attempted again, staggering badly. Damien theatrically sighed. 20 push-ups for. Such a sorry effort, but, sir, I get 30 push-ups for disrespect. In the rear of the observation deck, the older gentleman leaned forward slightly, his face scrunching up in annoyance. His gnarled hands, which lay relaxed on his knees, clenched, almost unnoticeably. Riley got up, her motherly instincts rising, but before she could stop him, Ethan fell to the ground, trying the push-ups with shaking arms. He contained 3 before falling. Pitiful, Daman declared to the room. We've got our work cut out for us with this one. As Ethan's eyes began to water, he struggled to hold back. Riley felt her chest tighten. She looked at the older man in the corner, surprised to see him staring at her. For a brief moment, his eyes contained an unspoken message: patience. Then he looked away from the floor where Coach Daman had already moved on, leaving Ethan to pick himself up by himself. The class went on, each drill being more challenging than the previous one. Ethan's face burned with fatigue and humiliation by the end of the hour. As the students bowed off, Riley stepped to the side of the mat, bent on talking with Coach Daman. The silent watcher in the corner remained still, but there was a change in his stance. A slight adjustment from observant passivity to wary preparedness, such as an alteration in barometric pressure that precedes thunder. It went largely unseen, except by those attuned to such a change. And as Riley waited for Coach Damien, chin held up in tacit determination, the storm clouds assembled. "Coach Damien!" Riley's voice broke through post-class conversation. Parents were gathering. Children, gear was being put away, and the dojo buzzed with the between-session energy. "Can I have a word?" Damien turned, towel around his neck, his look changing from distraction to honed charm. Ms. Dawson, Riley Dawson, Ethan's mom. "Ah, new kid." His smile fell short of the eyes. "What's it that you need?" Riley kept his professional demeanor intact in spite of the condescending manner in which he spoke of her son. "I'd like to speak about your style of teaching." "My style?" An undertone of steel crept into his tone. "Yes, I realize discipline is a key facet in martial arts, but embarrassing a child on his first day seems inimical." She remained calm, even unconfrontational. "Ethan's here to develop confidence, not have it destroyed." A number of parents in the vicinity ceased their conversations, gaze drawn to the interaction. Sensei Mark, gathering practice pads, slowed his pace, glancing from coach to parent. "Miss Dawson." Damien's tone grew slightly louder, making sure others would hear. "I've been training champions for 15 years. My techniques work. If you wish for Ethan to be treated like a fragile flower, then attempt ballet." Some parents tittered, awkwardly. Riley's face grew hot, but she maintained her cool. "There's a distinction between discipline and humiliation, coach. Forcing him to try 30 push-ups he obviously could not do in front of everyone. That's how we develop strength, ma'am." Damien's voice changed to one of over-the-top patience, as though explaining something obvious to someone dim-witted. "The real world does not give participation trophies. Neither does my dojo." Mumbling something to herself from behind the front desk, Mara shook her head slightly. Sitting quietly in the corner, the older observer was motionless, his focus fixed on the scene developing. "I get that," Riley went on unflinching. "But there's a lot of evidence that positive reinforcement is more powerful than Daman interrupted." With a laugh. "Research? Guess I'm supposed to have read some mommy blog." He spun, speaking to the room over Riley. "That's why we're raising a generation of snowflakes individuals, parents who believe they're smarter than experts." The dojo had fallen silent. Ethan was standing by the changing room door, his little face red with shame as he listened to his mother being mocked. "I'm a child development specialist." "Really?" Riley said, her tone icy now. "And I'm not asking you to throw away discipline, just that you explore methods that don't attack a child's sense of self-worth." Damien's smile disappeared totally. Look, Miss Dawson, this is not daycare. This is karate. My dojo, my way. If that's too hard for Ethan or for you, there's the door. He swept his arm across the room. I have a waiting list of families who know what it takes to do real training. Mom. Ethan's voice was barely audible from across the room. Can we go, please? The desperation in his tone broke something in Riley. She straightened, gathering her dignity around her like armor. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So, if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I think that would be best. She turned to go, then hesitated. Your trophies are impressive, Coach Damien. Your character less impressive. A frightening flash passed over Damon's face. Excuse me. A good teacher gets stronger by example. What kind of example are you giving now? Riley's voice was still soft but audible in the footsteps. Only Dojo Damon's jaw clenched. He moved closer, using his own height to tower over her. You have no idea about martial arts, lady, or raising a son with spine from what I see. A simultaneous intake of breath ran through the observing parents. Mara at the reception desk leaped to her feet, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. That's not fair, Riley snapped, her mask of calmness finally breaking. How dare you? How dare I what? Tell the truth. Damien was playing now, performing for his audience. That is precisely what is wrong with single mothers raising boys. They require discipline, structure, male presence, not helicopter parenting, and therapy sessions. In the corner of the room, the older man shifted uncomfortably in his seat. It was a subtle movement, a barely perceptible adjustment of his stance, but somehow it sent ripples of awareness. Several heads glanced in his direction, then back again to the argument. You don't know anything about me or my son, Riley replied, her tone stiff with suppressed fury. And this discussion is over. She turned to exit. But Damon had more to say. His pride was hurt, and he required the final word. Hey, no hard feelings, he shouted for everyone to be sure they heard. But perhaps one of these dads would like to show me something about how to run my dojo. He scanned the room, his challenge received in tense silence. His gaze flicked for a moment onto the older man sitting respectfully in the corner. Or granddads? The older man didn't flinch, his leathery face expressionless, but tension in the air shifted, like the electrified silence before lightning. That's what I was thinking, Damien said with gratification. Ethan, if you ever want to attempt again when you're ready for actual training, the gate's always open. Ethan froze, tears brimming in his eyes. Riley hurried to his side, putting a protective arm across his shoulders. We won't be returning, she declared, and I'll be reporting my experience to other parents in the community. A flash of worry flickered onto Damien's face. Business considerations registering, but he masked it with bluster. Your loss. Trust me, that kid is worth what I'm offering. As Riley escorted Ethan to the door, Mara emerged from behind the counter. I'll refund your deposit, she said softly, giving Damien a disapproving look. Mara, get back to your station, Damien snapped, and prepare for the next class. The receptionist lingered, conflict written on her face, then reluctantly slunk back to the desk. The next group of students already drifted in, wide-eyed at the altercation they'd stumbled into. Damien wrapped his hands together, immediately going back into instructor mode. All right, advanced class on the mat in 2 minutes. We're doing takedowns today. As the dojo reformed itself, Riley and Ethan stood at the entrance, gathering themselves. Riley bent to her son's height. I'm sorry, buddy. We'll find another dojo, one with a teacher who deserves you. Ethan nodded, scrubbing his eyes hastily. It's okay, Mom. I don't think I want to do karate anyway. Don't let one bad experience spoil it, she said softly. Not everyone is that way. She's right. The voice was low, but had a natural authority that compelled them both to turn. The older man from the viewing area loomed nearby, his presence both commanding and unassuming. Close up, Riley could read the character into his face. Decades of experience etched around eyes that held hardness and surprised kindness. The right teacher makes all the difference, he went on, particularly in martial arts. There was something familiar about him that Riley couldn't put his finger on. He held out a weathered hand to Ethan. Don't give up on yourself because someone else didn't cut it as a teacher. Ethan hesitated to take the proffered hand, his eyes wide. Thank you, Riley said, gratitude in her tone. I appreciate that. The man nodded once, then his attention returned to the dojo floor where Daman now showed a takedown on Sensei Mark. The younger instructor's discomfort, evident as he was, slammed repeatedly to the mat. Some people. The older man watched quietly. Mistake dominance for instruction. Riley watched his profile, the nagging sense of recognition building. I'm sorry. Have we met before? You look familiar. A faint smile touched the edges of his mouth. I get that sometimes. Before Riley could answer, a commotion on the mat drew everyone's attention. Daman had thrown Mark especially hard, and the young instructor was slow to rise, wincing in pain. That's how it's done, people, Damien announced proudly. No mercy on this mat. His eyes roamed the viewing area and lighted on the older man. A smirk crossed his face. Hey, sir, he called out. You've been watching pretty intently. Care to come and see a demonstration? His voice was insincerely deferent, with an edge of mockery. Always a good thing to demonstrate to the students the contrast between old-fashioned and new methods. The dojo went still. Mara at the reception desk let her pen fall. Riley glanced from Damien to the older man, then understanding in an instant what was going to happen. She set a wary hand on Ethan's shoulder but didn't step toward the door. Some part of her knew they had to remain. This was something Ethan needed to see. The older man appeared to weigh the invitation, his face unchanging. Then, with unhurried calmness, he draped his jacket over a nearby chair and turned toward the mat. Thank you, he said matter-of-factly. I'd be glad to take part. Discussions were cut mid-sentence as the older man took off his shoes at the mat's edge. He moved with economy, precise and unhurried, a study in restraint. Nothing extraneous, nothing frill. He came onto the training floor with the confidence of one returning home. Damien stood in the center of the mat, arms folded over his chest, a self-satisfied smirk playing at the edges of his mouth. The advanced class had drawn a semicircle, their faces ranging from fascination to second-hand embarrassment. None of them recognized the older gentleman, but Sensei Mark, holding his shoulder from the demonstration a little earlier, was gazing with increasing recognition. We were just practicing takedowns, Damien declared, his voice holding the theater. Quality of a showman. Perhaps you'd care to see how we do it at competition-level training. The older man nodded. Always good to keep learning. His tone was low, but in some way his voice filled the room, a growly bass note that bore weight. Lacking loudness, some of the adult students looked at one another. Mara had dropped all semblance of work behind the reception desk, her focus fixed on the floor. I don't believe we've met, Daman went on, swaggering closer with florid fanfare. Coach Daman Cortez, 3-time regional champion, Valley Edge martial arts founder. He held out his hand. And you are Chuck? The older man responded curtly, taking the handshake. A flicker of something, irritation at the absence of title or credentials, passed over Daman's face. He gripped Chuck's hand a fraction harder than he needed to, a childish dominance play that the older man did not seem to catch. Well, Chuck, Daman let go of his hold. Let's give these kids a little demonstration of experience as opposed to new technique. He turned to face his class. This is an ideal teaching moment, guys. The martial arts have changed enormously in the last few decades. What was effective back in the day doesn't fly in today's competitive universe. Chuck stood, patiently, hands loose by his sides. If he was piqued by Damien's haughtiness, he didn't give any indication. At the mat's edge, Riley and Ethan stayed on, caught up in the drama unfolding. Riley bent to whisper in her son's ear, "I think we're about to see something significant." Ethan nodded, his previous embarrassment forgotten for the moment as he observed the two men. Sensei Mark walked over to Daman, his voice low but audible in the quiet dojo. "Coach, I believe that's Chuck no Mark. Grab the pads." Daman cut in harshly. "Our guest will require them." Mark hesitated, nodded, and headed for the equipment area, flashing a sheepish glance in Chuck's direction. Damien swung back to the older man, sweeping his arm wide. "So, Chuck, what's your experience? Karate, judo, or just a martial arts enthusiast?" "A bit of everything," Chuck answered humbly. "Studied most of my life." "Great." Damien's grin broadened. A predator smelling easy meat. Always deference to the ancient. "Arts, but you'll notice how far it's come." He started loosening up his shoulders with over-the-top arm flails. Light stuff, of course, mere technical demonstration. Chuck nodded, making no moves of his own. His calmness was impressive, not stiff or tight, but a sort of loose readiness that seemed to emanate from his center. A hum ran through the observing students. One teenage boy elbowed his friend, whispering something that made the other's eyes go wide. The whisper started spreading student to student until it reached the parents' viewing area. "Oh my God!" a mother close to Riley breathed. "Is that really?" From the reception desk, Mara had caught Riley's eye and mouthed something that was suspiciously shaped like Chuck Norris. Riley's breathing had stopped. She glanced over at the older man with newfound insight. The familiarity she'd had before abruptly came into sharp focus. Chuck Norris, martial arts great, action hero, cultural icon standing respectfully in their neighborhood dojo, about to take on the most arrogant teacher she'd ever met. "Someone very special," Riley breathed quietly. "Someone who knows more about martial arts than nearly anyone in the world." On the floor, Damien was unaware of the ripple of acknowledgement spreading through his dojo. He was too intent on the chance to demonstrate his superiority, too immersed in his own story. "Okay, let's begin with something simple," Daman declared. "I'll show you a simple front takedown, nice and easy." He edged around Chuck in a shark-like circle. "Then perhaps you can teach us how you would have done it in the old days." The condescension in his voice was unmistakable. A few parents winced. Sensei Mark returned with protective pads, but Chuck waved them away with a polite smile. "No need," he said simply. "Just a demonstration, right?" Damien's smile tightened. "Your call. Don't say I didn't offer." He turned to his class. "Watch carefully. Notice the body mechanics, the weight distribution, the control points." Without warning, Daman lunged forward faster and more aggressively than appropriate for a demonstration with an older guest. It was a power move designed to catch Chuck off, balanced to assert dominance through surprise. What happened next occurred so quickly that many observers would later disagree on the exact sequence. Chuck's feet shifted slightly. His upper body seemed to barely move. Then somehow Damien was stumbling past him, thrown off balance by nothing, more than a subtle redirection of his own momentum. Damien caught himself, surprise flashing across his face before it was replaced by irritation. He laughed it off, playing to his audience. "Good reflex. Let's try that again a bit slower so everyone can see the technique." This time, Damien approached more deliberately, reaching for Chuck's arm to demonstrate a hold. Again, with minimal apparent effort. Chuck shifted, and suddenly their positions were reversed. Daman's arm gently but firmly controlled in a textbook joint lock. For a split second, genuine alarm registered on Damien's face. Chuck immediately released him, stepping back, with a respectful nod. "Nice structure in your approach," Chuck offered. "Strong foundation." The compliment seemed to disarm Damien momentarily. He nodded, recalibrating. The dojo remained utterly silent, the audience collectively holding their breath. "Let's show them something more dynamic," Damien suggested, a new edge in his voice. "A take-on defense scenario." Without waiting for agreement, he launched into a more complex attack sequence, moving with speed that abandoned any pretense of demonstration. His intent was clear: to overwhelm his older opponent to re-establish his dominance. Chuck moved like water, minimal, efficient, precise. Each of Damien's increasingly aggressive attacks was neutralized with subtle shifts and turns. There was no wasted energy, no flashy counters, just perfect positioning that repeatedly left Damien off balance and frustrated. After the fourth failed attempt, sweat had begun to bead on Damien's forehead. His expression had hardened, his breathing quickened. The control he prided himself on was slipping. "You've got good defensive basics," he said, not quite keeping the tension from his voice. "Let's see your offense. Attack me, and I'll show you how to defend yourself properly in modern times." Chuck paused, then nodded. "If you're sure." "Absolutely." Damien's smile was strained. "Don't go easy on me because of me." An eerie quiet descended on the dojo, the sound of shared expectation. Even those who hadn't yet identified Chuck felt something important was about to occur. "Observe closely, everyone," Damien declared, adopting a defensive position. "This is how we deal with incoming attacks in competition-prepared karate." Chuck did not move for a moment, his weathered face impassive. Then he advanced. A direct, simple approach with no telegraphing, no extraneous motion. Damien responded with a textbook block stepping to counter. And then it occurred so rapidly that many would later claim they must have blinked and not seen it. One moment, Damien was confidently performing his defense. The next, he was utterly controlled in a hold that pinned him securely without hurting him. Chuck had skipped every level of Damien's defense as if it did not exist. The dojo was filled with gasps. Some students applauded spontaneously. Mark gaped in open admiration, while Mara at the front desk did not trouble to conceal her thrilled smile. Chuck released the hold at once, stepping back respectfully. "Fine foundation," he said. "Good technical understanding." Damien remained frozen, trying to comprehend what had just occurred. His face darkened with a flush of red, embarrassment turning quickly to anger. The mask of the instructor slipped, showing the hurt ego beneath. "That was a lucky counter," he said, voice clenched. "Let's go again." Chuck shook his head back and forth. "I believe we've had a good demonstration." "No." Damien spoke louder. "We're not finished. That wasn't representative of real-world application." The mood in the dojo changed. The lighthearted demonstration had evolved into something else, something with an undercurrent of real tension. Parents exchanged uneasy glances. Sensei Mark took a half-step forward, concern on his face. "Coach," he started cautiously, "perhaps we should proceed to class." "Stay out of this, Mark," Daman snapped, never looking away from Chuck. "Our guest and I are still in the process of demonstrating." His stress on guest conveyed unmistakable warning. Chuck remained relaxed, his posture loose but attentive. Perhaps another time. No, now. Damien had lost all pretense of the affable instructor. One more round. Full contact. He turned to his students. "This is important. Watch what happens when old techniques collide with modern combat training." He assumed a fighting stance, everything in his body language conveying real aggressive intent. The demonstration had become a challenge, pride overwhelming professionalism. At the edge of the mat, Riley drew Ethan slightly closer. "Should we leave?" she breathed, suddenly worried about what her son was going to see. Ethan shook his head, his eyes wide. "No, Mom. I need to see this." Something in his tone, an assurance beyond his years, caused Riley to nod. He was correct. This had become about more than martial arts. Standing calmly on the mat, Chuck gazed directly at Damien. His face remained the same, but something in his eyes had a sharpening of intent, an ancient watchfulness stirring. "Are you certain this is the demonstration you wish to present?" Chuck asked softly. "Absolutely," Daman answered, tension emanating from every muscle. "Let's show them what real fighting looks like." Without further ado, he attacked. Not the measured pace of an instructor, but the full force of a man determined to prove something at any cost. And Chuck Norris, who had thus far remained passive while the confrontation escalated, finally moved to meet him. The collective gasp of the spectators seemed to freeze time itself. Damien sprang forward with explosive power. A flying front kick, aimed squarely at Chuck's midsection. A competition-level attack with real intent behind it. The kind of technique meant not just to score points, but to end arguments. Chuck didn't back away. With what seemed like minimal effort, he pivoted. Slightly, a subtle shift that allowed Daman's kick to slice through empty air. The momentum drove Daman forward, his balance compromised by the unexpected miss. Before he could recover, Chuck had redirected that energy with a gentle sweep that sent Daman stumbling to find his footing. No counterattack, no exploitation of the opening. Just perfect defensive redirection. Damien recovered quickly, his face darkening. He circled back, eyes narrowed, pride wounded, but determination doubled. This time, he came in with a rapid combination. Jab, cross, roundhouse kick. Professional-level strikes delivered at speed. Chuck's defense was invisible to all but the most trained eyes. He seemed to read Daman's intentions before the coach himself knew them. Neutralizing each strike not by blocking, but by simply not being where the attack landed. "Water flowing around stone! Fight back!" Damien growled through clenched teeth, frustration mounting. Chuck remained calm, his breathing steady, his movements economical. "I am," he replied quietly. This seemed to enrage Damien further. He pressed, forward with growing aggression, abandoning technique for power. His attacks grew wilder, his breathing more labored, sweat now streaming down his face. The carefully cultivated image of the controlled master was unraveling with each failed assault. Throughout it all, Chuck maintained perfect composure. His movements had a mathematical precision to them, just enough to neutralize each attack, never more. No wasted energy, no unnecessary flourish. At the edge of the mat, Ethan watched with wide eyes, unconsciously mimicking Chuck's stance. Riley noticed how her son's breathing had synchronized with the older man's. Steady, controlled. Something important was happening here, a lesson being absorbed on a level beyond words. In the viewing area, parents and students were. His neatly coiffed hair had fallen across his forehead, his GI disordered. The contrast between his rapidly deteriorating condition and Chuck's impassive tranquility was pronounced. "You're just defending," Damon panted, talking to both Chuck and the audience. "That's not real fighting." He waved his hand dismissively. "Anyone can parry." Chuck nodded earnestly. True control means knowing when not to strike. Something in the plane. Words cut deeper than any blow. Damien's eyes blazed. "Control this." He growled and came on with his most violent attack yet, a flying combination that dropped all illusion of demonstration. What followed came so smoothly that it looked choreographed. When Damien committed entirely to attack, Chuck at last acted, with intent. Not backing away, but coming in. His counterattacks were dead on, measured, and flawlessly timed. 3 neat contacts so controlled they could not rightly be referred to as hits to pressure points that directly affected Daman's balance and coordination. The coach ended up on one knee, not hurt, but briefly put out of commission by the deadliness of the technique. His face registered raw shock. Chuck stepped back at once, loose hands at his sides. "Good recovery position," he said, as though Daman had meant to wind up precisely where he did. A shiver of anxious laughter moved among the onlookers, hastily stifled. The demonstration had gone past embarrassing into something close to mythic. Damien stood up slowly, his face flushed with a volatile mix of humiliation and fury. For an instant, it looked as though he might lose all control. His fists had balled at his sides, shaking a little with adrenaline and emotion. "Coach!" Mark's voice broke through the tension. "Maybe we should thank our visitor and proceed with class." His tone held respect and a warning. The distraction brought Daman back from where he was teetering. He straightened, fiddling with adjusting his GI with shaky hands, struggling to put together again his dignified instructor image. Of course he did, voice strained. An educational experience. He turned to Chuck, reaching out with visible effort. "Thank you for taking part." Chuck shook the hand, grip firm, but not testing. "Thank you for letting me." The plain sincerity in his tone made it worse. Not a trace of mockery or gloating, just good manners. Damien's jaw tightened as he pulled his hand away. Class. Damien faced his students, his voice strained as he tried to master the situation. "What we've observed here is a good representation of classical defensive techniques, good within certain parameters, but restrictive in contemporary competition." The students looked at each other, several of them shifting uncomfortably at this obvious attempt to save face. One bold teenage boy put up his hand. "But sir, he had you completely in his control without—" "That's enough, Jason." Damien cut him short. This was a demonstration, not a contest. I had been holding back because it was safer that way. He shot a look at Chuck. Our guest is, after all, much older. The disrespect lingered in the air like a discordant note. Chuck didn't flinch, but in the room around him, faces showed disapproval. Sensei Mark shook his head, looking down. "Now practice takedown in pairs," Damien went on, and turned his back to Chuck. "Standard rules of competition. Mark, monitor the west side of the mat." With reluctant reluctance, the students started getting into position, and Chuck bowed politely toward the mat before turning to leave. The tension in the room was thick, everyone feeling the demonstration had been cut short, that something still hung in the balance. Damien, seeing Chuck's back away out of the corner of his eye, couldn't help with one last jab. "By the way," he called out to him, voice echoing around the dojo, "I didn't hear your whole name." Chuck stopped, turning around with that same unflappable cool. For an instant, it seemed like he was going to just let it drop, and then his gaze flashed for an instant to where Ethan was standing observing. Something in the boy's face. Hope, perhaps, or the desire for an ending, seemed to make up his mind. "Norris," he told them. "Chuck Norris." The dojo erupted in murmurs and gasps. A few students broke ranks outright, turning to look. Parents in the spectators' area surged forward in their seats. Chuck Norris, the Chuck Norris. The words came from Jason, the teen student who had asserted himself a little while before. Damon stiffened, color seeping from his face as the name sank in. His meticulously built story fell apart in a heartbeat. Chuck Norris, martial arts icon, 7-time world karate champion, Hollywood superstar, had been the old man he'd been condescending to and trying to embarrass. "Oh my God," Mark gasped, taking an involuntary step forward. "Sir, it's an honor. Your style is I've learned your—" He broke off overwhelmed. Mara behind the reception desk was not trying to conceal her glee. "Called it," she declared to nobody in general. Students had utterly given up on pretending to carry on class, gathering an informal semicircle around Chuck. A little girl walked over with opened eyes. "My dad has all your movies. Can I have a photo?" Before Chuck could speak, Daman located his voice. "Enough!" he yelled, desperation lending his command added weight. "This is still a class. Get back to your stations." Nobody stirred. The power he'd had moments before had vanished totally. Chuck held out a hand in a gentle motion, and the dojo was quiet. "Your teacher is correct," he said. "You're here to study. That should always be your priority." His voice rang out effortlessly, without effort. "Continue your training, please." The straightforward request without threats or demands was enough to have a right-away impact. Students started coming back to their seats, though several continued, staring at Chuck with admiration. It was an exemplary display of leadership, quiet authority disenfranchising Damon's bluster. The difference could not have been more dramatic. Chuck headed back to the door with the same unhurried self-assurance. When he had gotten to the rim of the mat, Damien, needing to save something from the debacle, shouted after him again. "Mr. Norris, maybe before you leave, one more demonstration for us." His voice had changed entirely, now differential, nearly begging. A proper display this time. The desperation was cringe-worthy to see, a man attempting to put himself in line with the very legend he himself just unwittingly disrespected. Chuck hesitated, weighing the request, his gaze sweeping slowly about the room, absorbing the student faces eager and intent, Damien's look of mortification, and finally settling on Ethan and Riley on the mat's edge. "I believe," he said at length, "another demonstration would be useful." The dojo shifted itself with stunning celerity. Students closed ranks behind the mat in a large circle. Parents packed the viewing area, and phones were seen in hands around the room. The atmosphere had changed totally, excitement and anticipation replacing the tension previously. Damien was in the middle of the mat, his body language a study in opposing wants. He'd combed his hair, adjusted his GI, and was trying to emanate confident professionalism. But the taut tension in his shoulders and fluttering shifting of his eyes gave away his inner turmoil. He was stuck in an act of his own creation, frantically searching for a way out to protect his reputation. Chuck took off his shoes again and stepped onto the mat with the same quiet reserve he'd demonstrated all along. In spite of his attire in street clothes, jeans, and button-down collar, he managed to appear more the martial arts master than Damien in black belt and patch-covered GI. "Thanks for doing this," Damien said, his voice containing a difference that had been completely missing before. "A privilege to train with a legend." The insincerely transparent hung uncomfortably in the air. Chuck simply nodded, his face expressionless. "What do you want to demonstrate?" he asked. Damon perked up slightly, recognizing an opening to direct the course. "Maybe we could demonstrate some advanced competition skills or film fighting as opposed to real-world applications of combat." His plan was to present himself as a peer, an equal instructor, teaming up with a celebrity guest. Chuck paused for a moment, then nodded his head. "I think," he replied, his voice carrying well across the emptying dojo. "The students could gain the most by knowing the basics, the principles that govern all good martial arts." Naturally enough, Damien assented at once. "Fundamentals are essential." He turned to speak to his class. "Listen, everyone. This is a precious chance to learn from one of the masters." "Thank you," Chuck replied. "But I'm not here to instruct. You're their coach. I'm only a guest." The plain statement held no reproach, but seemed somehow to pierce the essence of Damien's pretense. "Perhaps you could show me your method and I'll make some comments." It was a kind offer, enabling Damien to preserve his position of authority while providing a teachable moment. But the coach's expression revealed his quandary. To illustrate would risk further demonstration of his limitations. To decline would be a concession of those same limitations. Indeed, Damon countered desperation, sliding his smile to the edge. "I believe that everyone would rather see you demonstrate, Mr. Norris. I'd be happy to help." Chuck met his eyes for a second, then nodded. "Once, as you'd like." He turned to speak to the students directly. "The essence of all the martial arts is not technique," he started, his voice assuming the natural rhythm of a man who has taught for decades. "It's character, namely 4 aspects: discipline, respect, control, and humility." The dojo was completely quiet. students and parents both hanging on his every word. Even Damien froze, torn between the conflicting desires to prove himself and to learn from the legend standing in front of him. Discipline is not punishment, Chuck continued. It's the daily commitment to improvement even when no one is watching. Respect is not fear. It's recognizing the worth in yourself and others. His eyes moved deliberately to Ethan, who stood transfixed at the edge of the mat. Control is not domination. It's mastery of yourself before attempting to engage with others. The fourth element hung in the air unspoken. Damien shifted uneasily. And humility? Sensei Mark inquired from the side. Sincere-sounding curiosity. Chuck smiled begrudgingly. Humility is knowing that no matter how much you know, there is always something more to learn. It's the attitude that keeps a black belt's mind as open as a white belt's. His eyes came back. To Damien, will you assist me in demonstrating these principles in action? The coach nodded rigidly, trapped in a protocol cage he could hardly deny before his entire dojo. We will begin with a simple engagement, Chucky, Meow said. Attack any way you like. Damien visibly deliberated. His earlier aggressive assaults had been nullified with ease. A technical attempt had not done better. Whatever he did now would be under close scrutiny from all present. Remember, Chuck said softly, this is about demonstration, not competition. Something in those words, maybe the unstated promise of dignity, seemed to focus Damien. He nodded, breathed in, and got into a proper fighting stance. What transpired was impressive, not for its drama, but for its precision. Damien attacked with real skill. His technical base was good when not tainted by ego, and Chuck countered with flawless defensive movement, pointing out the coach's stronger aspects while gently correcting the weaker ones. Good structure, Chuck said after, a particularly clean combination from Damien. Look at the foundation, feet placed for stability and mobility. He motioned for the students to note particular details, with the respect due a prized demonstrator, not opponent. It was a masterclass in teaching as well as martial arts, Chuck raising both the content and the coach by his methodology. Daman seemed to react positively to this treatment for a few moments, his movements flowing more easily, less forced. There were flashes of the accomplished martial artist he could have been if he didn't have his insecurities weighing him down. Now, Chuck indicated, moving back slightly. Let's correct a frequent error in defensive stance. He showed a subtle error in stance, challenging Daman to take advantage. The coach moved in with a textbook attack, and Chuck utilized the contact to drive home his point, letting Daman successfully apply the technique. Excellent, Chuck allowed. Perfect correction. A strange expression crossed Daman's face, something between surprise and confusion, as if he'd forgotten what genuine praise felt like. For a moment, he seemed to stand taller, his movements more confident. The demonstration continued, evolving into what appeared to be a productive collaboration. Students watched intently, occasionally nodding with new understanding. Parents in the viewing area had relaxed, enjoying the unexpected masterclass. Then came the turning point. During an exchange about counter-striking principles, Chuck executed a technique that, while perfectly controlled, left Daman momentarily wrong-footed. A few students murmured appreciatively. It was nothing compared to the earlier exchanges, just a small moment of superior skill, but it was enough to trigger Damien's fragile ego. His expression hardened. The collaborative energy vanished. Without warning, he launched into a full power combination. Abandoning the instructional framework for a genuine attack, Chuck's reaction was immediate but measured. He neutralized the sudden aggression with minimal movement, his expression never changing. When Damien pressed harder, Chuck simply increased his defensive precision proportionally. "Coach," Mark called from the sidelines, concern evident in his voice. Damien ignored him, fully committed now to proving something to himself, to his students, to the world. His attacks grew more aggressive, more reckless. Sweat flew from his forehead as he pushed himself to the limit, determined to land just one clean strike on the legend. Chuck remained centered, his movements so efficient they appeared almost casual, but those with trained eyes could see the extraordinary skill involved. Perfect timing, distance management, and threat assessment. "This isn't a competition," Chuck reminded him quietly. "The hell it isn't," Daman growled low enough that only Chuck could hear. "You come into my dojo, humiliate me in front of my students." He punctuated the accusation with a vicious hook that would have caused serious damage if it had connected. Chuck evaded it with millimeters to spare. "That wasn't my intention," Chuck replied calmly. "Bullshit," Damien spat, firing off another salvo. "You think you're superior to me?" "No," Chuck replied, still on the defensive. "Different experience over youth. We all bring something to the table." It was an olive branch, an opportunity for Damien to retreat from the edge. But the coach was beyond reason now, caught up in a vortex of hurt ego and public scrutiny. "Show me," he bellowed, voice increasing. "Enough defending. Demonstrate what Chuck Norris actually has. Or are the myths Hollywood hyperbole?" The gauntlet dangled. The dojo had fallen into stunned silence, the air thick with tension. All of them felt the demonstration had turned into something else, something with real stakes. Chuck's face didn't change, but something moved in his eyes. A decision was made. "As you want," he said, nothing more. What followed was so quick that many would later argue about precisely what they'd witnessed. Chuck stepped, not with violence or hostility, but with the fluidity of decades of expertise boiled down to an instant. 3 points of contact, so deliberate they were, almost not even strikes. Damien's strike froze mid-air. His eyes bulged in shock. Then his legs simply gave way beneath him, and he dropped to his knees on the mat. It wasn't painful or dramatic, just devastatingly effective. One moment, Damien was attacking with everything he had. The next, he was immobilized, his body responding to pressure points and nerve clusters that most martial artists only read about. Chuck immediately stepped back, hands relaxed at his sides. There was no victory in his stance, no jubilation. If anything, he seemed faintly regretful that such a protest had been necessary. The dojo burst into gasps and ejaculations. A number of students spontaneously applauded, soon followed by parents. Phones recorded the moment from all sides. Sensei Mark gazed with unhidden wonder, while Mara at the reception desk pumped her fist in silent triumph. Riley wrapped an arm around Ethan's shoulders, holding him close. "Look at that," she whispered. "That's what strength looks like." Ethan nodded, his eyes wide with awe. "He didn't look even angry, Mom. That's the point, pal." Damien sat on the mat, his knees on the ground. The fight drained from him entirely, his carefully built persona. The unbeatable coach, the greatest fighter, had been taken apart in seconds, not violently, but with such surgically precise efficiency that no excuses were left. Chuck took a step forward and held out his hand. "Thanks for the demonstration," he said loudly enough for all to hear. "Your foundation is sound. Give it the right direction, and there's no end to what you might do." It was exactly the right balance of recognition and challenge. Seeing Damien's genuine ability while indicating a higher direction, the coach looked at the extended hand for a very long time. Inner conflict written across his face. Pride struggled against truth. Ego fought with the undeniable facts in front of him. The whole dojo seemed to hold its breath to see what would prevail. Then gradually, Damien put up his hand and took Chuck's. As Chuck steadied him to his feet, something minor shifted about Damien's expression. Not an about face, perhaps the first crack in a facade built years to the E level. "Thank you, Mr. Norris," he said, voice low but firm. The demonstration was telling. It wasn't an apology or an epiphany, but something. A small nod to reality, a tentative step toward truth. Chuck nodded once, taking it for what it was. Then he turned to speak to the students. "Thank you all for your time," he said. "Remember, technique without character is mere movement. The true martial artist cultivates both in equal proportions." He bowed respectfully to the class, then to Damien, and finally to the dojo itself. Without further ado, he turned and made his way toward the door, the same quiet presence he'd arrived with. Passing Riley and Ethan, he hesitated for a moment. "Don't give up on martial arts," he said to the child. "The right instructor makes all the difference." The next thing he knew, he was standing outside the old forge, staring at a memory of what had been, and what would never be again. His eyes flickered briefly to where Sensei Mark stood watching, and a wordless understanding passed between them. Then Chuck continued toward the door, leaving behind a dojo forever changed by his brief visit. Damien stood motionless in the center of the mat, facing a room full of students and parents who had witnessed both his failure and his choice in its aftermath. What he would build from this moment remained to be seen, but the old foundation had been irreparably shaken. And as the door closed behind Chuck Norris, a whisper ran through the dojo. Did that really just happen? It had, and no one present would ever forget it. A week had passed since what the local martial arts community had come to call the Norris incident. The YouTube video, shakily filmed on a parent's phone, had reached over 2 million views. Local news had picked up the story. Martial arts legend delivers life lesson at suburban dojo. The comment sections were filled with equal parts awe, humor, and philosophical debate about the true meaning of martial arts in the modern age. Valley Edge Dojo looked the same on the surface. The same bright banners advertising champion training hung in the windows. The same trophies gleamed in their cases. But beneath the familiar exterior, subtle changes had taken root, like new growth after a forest fire. Riley Dawson pulled into the parking lot, glancing at her son in the rear view mirror. "You sure about this, buddy? We can find another place if you want." Ethan nodded, his expression more determined than she'd seen in months. "I'm sure, Mom. I want to try again." The past week had seen a transformation in Ethan. He'd watched the video of Chuck Norris dozens of times, studying the legend's calm, composure, his economy of movement, the way he commanded respect without demanding it. Something about that quiet strength had resonated deeply with the boy. "Okay then," Riley said, turning off the engine. "But remember our deal. First sign of anything like last time, and we're out of here." They approached the dojo's entrance with cautious optimism. Through the windows, they could see a class in progress. Children in white GIs moving through basic forms under the supervision of a familiar figure. Not Damien, but Sensei Mark. His instructions delivered with calm clarity. Marlo looked up as they entered, recognition lighting her face. "Figured we'd heard the last from you two." "We're just considering options," Riley replied guardedly. Mara shot a look toward the training floor and then leaned in conspiratorially. "Things are changed now. You'd be surprised." Before Riley was able to question her, the office door swung open and Coach Damon stepped out. He looked physically unchanged, still fit, still walking as a man who had spent his whole life practicing the martial arts. Something in his attitude had changed, though. The blustery swagger was gone, replaced by a more pent-up energy. His eyes opened slightly when he saw Riley and Ethan. For an instant, he stood there seeming almost lost. Then, struggling visibly, he came toward them. "Ms. Dawson," he said softly, his voice no longer having its dramatic ring. "Ethan, I didn't think I'd ever see you again." "We're just exploring possibilities," Riley said again, her voice colorless but protective. Damon nodded, taking this in. Naturally, he stalled, obviously fighting something inside before going on. "Before you make a decision, I'd like to offer you an apology for our last encounter. My actions were unprofessional and unacceptable." Riley blinked in true surprise. She had anticipated defensiveness, maybe even hostility, not this stammering effort at accountability. "Thank you," she stated. Daman focused on Ethan, lowering himself to one knee to engage the boy on a level. Not condescending, but respectfully. "Ethan, I pushed too hard and employed humiliation rather than teaching. That is not what martial arts are supposed to be about, not what I'm supposed to be." He talked straight out, Manto boy. "If you do decide to go back to Valley Edge, I assure a new experience." Ethan regarded him seriously. "Because Chuck Norris defeated you?" Riley fought to hide a smile at her son's bluntness. Damien, to his credit, didn't waver. "Because Chuck Norris instructed me," he amended. "Sometimes the greatest lessons aren't pleasant, in the moment." From the reception counter, Mara uttered a suspicious snort, hastily followed by a cough. Damien gave her a glance, but it was not followed by the acerbity of real anger. On the training room floor, Sensei Mark had been aware of their entrance. He finished his instruction and walked over, bowing politely as he crossed the reception threshold. "Miss Dawson, Ethan, good to see you again," he said amiably. "Are you looking to come back with us?" "We're looking." Riley said it the third time. Mark nodded. "I totally get it." If I might make a suggestion, he pointed towards the training floor. "We are putting on a new beginners class this afternoon. Maybe Ethan would be interested in sitting in on it. No obligation to join in. Just sit in and see if it's for him." The difference between this open approach and their initial experience was stark. Riley looked over at Ethan, who nodded vigorously. "Sounds fair to me," she said. "Thanks." As Mark walked Ethan toward the observation area, Daman hesitated self-consciously. The usual confident instructor appeared to be completely at a loss, a man learning anew to move through a world where force was no longer his best option. "Coach Cortez," Riley started, "I do thank you for the apology. That must have been difficult." Damien's demeanor changed, something real piercing the rehearsed mask. "None of this week has been easy, Miss Dawson. Perhaps not even needed." He caught sight of the office where a new sign on the wall, a plain-framed quote, had not previously existed. "The successful warrior is the average man with laser-like focus." "Bruce Lee, we've made some adjustments," he went on. Mark is adding more classes. "I'm reconsidering my teaching approach." He managed a self-deprecating smile that would have seemed impossible a week ago. Having your techniques dismantled by Chuck Norris tends to inspire reflection. Before Riley could respond, the dojo door opened again. A tall woman in business attire entered, leading a nervous-looking boy about Ethan's age. Damien straightened, professional instincts kicking in. "Welcome to Valley Edge," he started, then stopped himself. The familiar shtick, all bluster and menace, literally died on his lips. Instead, he just held out his hand. "I'm Coach Damien. How can we help you today?" The woman told her name as Mrs. Chen, that her son Alex had been experiencing difficulty with bullies in school. As Damien listened, genuinely listened without cutting in, Riley observed with awe. The change wasn't finished, maybe wasn't even certain, but was definitely in progress. She passed to the viewing platform where Ethan was already deep into observation of the class. Sensei Mark was dividing up students, his instruction systematic and supportive. Nobody was being ostracized or embarrassed. When a little girl had trouble with a move, he knelt next to her, patiently illustrating his attention solely on her success. "What do you think?" Riley asked, sitting next to her son. Ethan's eyes stayed glued to the class. "It's different now," he explained curtly. "Better." "And Coach Damien, does he actually change?" Ethan thought about this a lot. Chuck Norris was quoted as saying the essence of martial arts is character. Perhaps Coach is trying to improve his character right now. Riley's pride surged at her son's perception. "That's very smart, buddy." "Mom." Ethan looked at her, his face serious. "Can I go at it again?" For real this time? She gazed at him, the new resolve in his eyes, the slight straightening of his shoulders. Something had stirred in him, a quiet assurance that had nothing to do with kicks or punches. "If you're sure?" she said. Ethan's nod was resolute. "I am." As they walked back to the reception desk to register, Mara was entertaining a group of parents with her eyewitness account of the Norris event. And then he just assisted Damien up. Cool as cool can be. No trash talk, no gloating. That's what true mastery is all about, folks. She winked at Riley and Ethan as they neared. "Back for more, huh? Can't say I blame you. Things are heating up. Around here, we'd like to register for the beginner's class," Riley affirmed. "Music to my ears." Mara took out the paperwork with a flourish. "Fair warning, we've seen a surge in new registration since the video went viral. Turns out viewing an arrogant coach getting humbled by Chuck Norris is quite the advertisement." From across the room, Damen hollered out, "I can hear you, Mara." "I know, Coach," she answered brightly, practicing that humility thing. Astonishingly, Damen shook his head with what seemed to be real amusement. Another tiny adjustment, the ability to laugh at himself, maybe for the first time in years. Later, as Ethan changed into his new GI, properly fitted this time, Riley watched the dojo with new eyes. The trophy case that had once seemed to symbolize Damien's ego now stood adjacent to a new bulletin board titled Student Achievements, featuring academic honors and community service alongside tournament wins. A small addition, but a telling one. Sensei Mark approached as classes changed over. "Ethan ready for his first official lesson?" "Almost," Riley replied. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Is this change for real or just damage control?" After the video went viral, Mark considered the question seriously. Both, probably. Damien's pride took a massive hit. He can't deny reality when 2 million people have watched it, but something deeper happened too. He glanced toward the office where Damien was reviewing curriculum materials. "I've worked with him for 3 years, and I've never seen him like this actually reflecting, questioning his methods because of Chuck Norris." Partly Mark smiled, but I think it was also seeing himself through your eyes and Ethan's. The video forced him to confront who he'd become. Riley nodded thoughtfully. "Second chances are rare." "They are," Mark agreed. And speaking of which, he hesitated. "I got a call yesterday from Mr. Norris." Riley's eyebrows shot up. "Really?" "He wanted to check on things, make sure his visit had a positive impact, not just created chaos." Mark shook his head in wonder. That's the kind of martial artist he is. Concerned with what he leaves behind, not just the immediate effect. "What did you tell him?" "The truth, that we're working on it, that his lesson is still unfolding." Mark glanced toward the training floor, where students were gathering. He asked specifically about Ethan, whether he'd returned. He remembered Ethan's name. Riley was touched by this detail. Mark nodded, said there was something special there, a quiet strength that reminded him of himself as a boy. Before Riley could process this, Ethan emerged from the changing room, his new GI crisp and white, his expression a mixture of nervousness and determination. He approached them with careful steps as if already practicing balance. "How do I look?" he asked. "Like a martial artist," Riley replied honestly. Ethan smiled, a genuine, full smile that reached his eyes. "I was thinking about what Chuck Norris said about discipline and respect and control and humility. What about it? Those aren't just for fighting, are they? They're for everything." Mark exchanged a glance with Riley, both adults momentarily, speechless at the wisdom from such a young source. "That's exactly right, Ethan," Mark said finally. "The physical techniques are just the beginning. The real practice happens everywhere else." The beginning class was called to order, and Ethan took his place in line, not hiding at the back this time, but standing squarely in the second row. As Mark led them through warm-ups, Riley noticed Damen observing from the side, his expression thoughtful. The coach caught her watching and gave a small acknowledging nod. Not friendship, not yet forgiveness, but recognition of her as a parent, with valid concerns of himself as a teacher with room to grow. As Riley settled into the viewing area, Mara slipped into the seat beside her. "Something you should know," the receptionist said quietly. "That last week after everything went down, Daman called Chuck Norris." "He what?" Mara nodded. "Tracked down his contact through some martial arts association. Don't know exactly what was said, but Daman was in his office for over an hour. When he came out, she shook her head wonderingly. Different man. On the training floor, Mara was demonstrating a basic block, showing each student individually how to position their arms. When he reached Ethan, he spent extra time adjusting the boy's stance with encouraging words. Ethan's face glowed with concentration. "You know what the real miracle is?" Mara continued watching the class. Damien's letting Mark teach his way. No interference, no undermining. First time in 3 years. Riley considered this. People can change when properly motivated. Mara agreed. Riley, nothing like getting effortlessly dismantled by Chuck Norris to adjust your perspective. They shared a laugh, the tension of the previous visit finally dissolving completely. As the class continued, Riley found herself reflecting on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought them back here. One quiet man stepping forward at exactly the right moment. One demonstration of true mastery, not just of martial arts, but of character. The ripples spreading outward, touching lives in ways that might never be fully measured. Somewhere across town, Chuck Norris was going about his day, perhaps unaware of the profound impact of his brief visit. Or perhaps, given the wisdom in those calm eyes, he knew exactly what he had set in motion. At the end of class, the students lined up and bowed to their instructor, to each other, and to the dojo itself. As Ethan completed this ritual for the first time, his movements earnest and precise, Riley saw in him the beginnings of something remarkable, not just confidence, but a deeper understanding of strength. The quiet kind that had nothing to prove, that lifted others instead of dominating them. The kind that changed rooms just by entering them and left lessons that continued to teach long after departure. True strength, Riley realized, watching her son bow with newfound purpose, doesn't announce itself with volume or intimidation. It whispers through example, transforms through presence, and endures through the changes it inspires in others. Like ripples from a stone dropped in still water, expanding outward in ever-widening circles, or like a quiet legend entering a suburban dojo on an ordinary Saturday afternoon, leaving behind extraordinary change. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.